Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming along to our first EDI Caucus seminar. I'm going to hand over to Jason in just a minute, but I wanted to start off with just acknowledging the lack of racial diversity on the panel today. This is something we are addressing in future seminars to ensure that we do properly represent the communities that we're serving. I also want to note that we do have other forms of diversity on the panel that might not be immediately visible. For example, myself, I'm disabled. I will hand over to Jason.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all keeping well. I can't really tell because I can't see anybody, but I'm really hoping everyone's keeping well and more importantly, having a very nice day. And I guess, it's a privilege to have everyone here today and will hopefully be a stimulating conversation around, the EDICa project and EDI more broadly. But before we begin with the festivities, it's probably just useful to go over one or two things in terms of really the respect and the kind of code of conduct that we want to kind of embody in these spaces, which we ultimately want to be a safe space for everyone. So generally speaking, EDICa is dedicated to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of varying intersex around gender, gender identity, expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, and obviously ideas around race, religion, or other intersectional factors. And it's really important that people are aware that we won't and we do not tolerate any kind of harassment during these events. And the most important things that we want to kind of canvas this with, creating a space of love, respect, acceptance, and belonging. And those kind of tenets are really important and really kind of provide a platform for people literally to come as they are. So please, it's really important that we kind of adhere to these principles that, we effectively have set out so that everybody has a sense of belonging and a sense of kind of, I guess, freedom in some respects in these spaces and is able to feel some sort of safety. In terms of the Q&A, during the session, participants can ask as many questions as they would like. It'll go to the Q&A function, and towards the end of the questions that are asked to the speakers, this will be shared by the host and other people. So you can submit this with your name or you can do this anonymously, but please use question and answer. It'd be really good to get that kind of interaction and to get that dialogue going. And then from an accessibility point of view, we were unable, unfortunately, to secure a BSL interpreter. So there won't be an interpreter for this event, but we will add a BSL interpreted version to the website after the event. So please forgive us for not being able to do that on this occasion, but for future events, this will be something that we will hopefully have in place. In terms of kind of activating the captions options, you can do this by clicking the three dots at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting the closed caption option. So hopefully that should be available for everyone. If there isn't, just please again place something in the Q&A and we'll try and attend to that as soon as possible. If your question and answer function is not accessible to you, please raise your hand and you should be able to ask a question verbally. So I hope that's okay. And I guess from there we can proceed on to the festivities. So just to give a kind of a very brief synopsis in terms of EDICa's purpose and ethos. So the vision is really to create an inclusive space for researchers and develop innovative cultures that enable diverse researchers to think and thrive in different ways. One of the most important things is really to kind of think about how we remove these barriers to participation, particularly experienced within the intersection by women, disabled, LGBTQI+, and racially minoritized researchers, and individuals with caring responsibilities or researchers with caring responsibilities as well. So across the gambit, there's really this kind of thinking around how we embody lots of different underrepresented people and do it in a way that really speaks to their lived experience and provide kind of bespoke levers for those individuals to draw on in terms of really being able to access the help and support needed. Importantly, EDICa acts as a vocal point in identifying and evaluating and synthesizing EDI initiatives. So while we recognize that there are many EDI initiatives in circulation, part of what we're trying to do in EDICa is really kind of bridge that gap between theory and practice and really have that praxis element to what we do in terms of really attempting to address the wide and diverse range of needs of varying stakeholders across the intersectional gambit. In terms of using evidence reviews, as part of our own project to manage a flexible fund, EDICa will coordinate and disseminate interdisciplinary research. And much of this research is really going to kind of canvas the national and international landscape, really thinking about kind of communities of practice and how we equip them and provide them with agency and autonomy to be able to challenge the cultures that they want to find themselves in, but perhaps more importantly, create and establish inclusive cultures that center at their heart belonging, agency, and autonomy. Okay. So what do we hope to achieve? I think one of the things that's kind of really important is to really engage with key stakeholders. So Caucus Network members and funders will be informed about what we're doing on an interim basis. So there'll be a lot of information provided not only through the website, but through social media channels in terms of the information that's happening, the things that are happening within the project team, and how this is correlating and translating in the practical sense. Again, the EDICa project team specifically rates the 3 working streams, and those particular working streams are what we're going to kind of be discussing today in quite a lucid way. And perhaps most importantly, the sharing of best practice and how we foster and develop this sense of community. The fostering of community really is based on how we also make sense of community in kind of ever-changing, disorientating times from a societal perspective. So sharing best practice and engaging with best practice, it'll be really useful to kind of hear people's ideas on how they may also elicit and develop these types of practices within their various communities, and we can find ways to almost implement this kind of ongoing dialogue. And then perhaps the thing that's important to recognize for future seminars is that it's going to alternate between, you know, showcasing the research, but really kind of showcasing what the individuals are doing in the EDICa network and project, and showcasing their work, their values and belief systems, and really centering and prioritizing the research of marginalized and minoritized researchers. And this very much aligns with the EDICa mantra of what we're trying to do across the life course of this particular project. Okay. Right. That was a really nice start for you, hopefully. So now you're going to have a main, and I hope that's just as sumptuous. So we shall start with a couple of questions. So in the first instance, it'd be great to gain an introduction from everyone. I think that's always useful. So we'll look to kind of introduce the participants. They'll be introducing themselves, and then we'll kind of proceed to the questions. So if I may ask Robert to introduce himself first, and then we'll follow by James, and then by Kate.
Thanks, Jason, and good afternoon, colleagues on the call. My name is Robert MacIntosh. I'm based at Northumbria University, and I'm leading one of the work streams in the EDICa project.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and good afternoon to everybody as well. Yeah, I'm James Richards. I'm based here in the Edinburgh Business School at Heriot-Watt University. I'm an associate professor in human resource management, and I'm Workstream 3 principal investigator, which looks at the organisation of work.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Kate Sang. I'm Professor of Gender and Employment Studies, and I also work at Edinburgh Business School at Heriot-Watt University. I'm the Principal Investigator of the EDI Caucus overall, and I'm also the lead for Workstream 1, which looks at the career life cycle.
Fantastic. And for those that may have a visual impairment, can I ask all of you just to provide a brief description of what you may be wearing or what you may look like, just to provide a visual narrative?
So I think we agreed I would do this first. So I'm a white cisgender woman with long red hair. I'm wearing a black shirt with yellow flowers on, and I wear what was described earlier as 1960s glasses, apparently.
That's good. James?
Sorry, I missed that part of the brief early on, but yeah, I would describe myself as white, middle-aged, wearing glasses, and probably a little bit more hair than most people my age group. That's how some people kind of look upon me or remember me or find me out.
That's great. Thank you, James. Robert?
And I have envy of both Kate's glasses and James' head of hair. I'm a white male. I'm wearing a navy jumper, a white shirt, and disappointingly grey hair and transparent glasses.
That's great. and my name is Jason, and I'm a black male, and I am wearing a blue and white t-shirt, and I have thigh length dreadlocks. So that is my descriptor. And I guess the best thing to kind of do now is really to proceed to the questions. I guess that's in some respects what everyone's here for. So I'd love to start with Kate. And kind of really, Kate, just in the first instance, how did you come to this work? I'd be really intrigued to kind of know your arc in terms of coming into this work, and your own kind of amazing achievements in this area have been quite remarkable and really inspirational. So it'd be great to know how you came to this work and how it kind of embodies what you are from an identity point of view in academia.
So thanks, Jason. I was thinking about the question and wondering how far back do I go? And does it go as far back as when I was told at school I couldn't play cricket because I was a girl and only boys were allowed to play cricket? And that might have been the time that I started to get angry about these kind of issues. So I think that probably was my starting point. My father is a feminist, and I think he's one of the more influential people in terms of thinking about what it was possible for women to do and women not to do. And I then wanted to be an astronaut. And my father assured me that you can be a woman astronaut. It turns out my gender was probably not what stopped me being an astronaut. There might be some other features. But when I was in my mid to late teens, I went to an RAF recruiting office to look at going to the RAF when I graduated from university. And he brought out a massive poster, and it had each of the jobs, and there were two columns of pay. There was the men's column of pay and there was the women's column of pay. And I asked him if women were paid less for doing the same jobs as men, and he said yes. And I left the office and never thought about going to the RAF again. It had never occurred to me that that was even possible. So all through my university career, from my undergraduate, my master's, my PhD, has all been about feminism. So my undergraduate history project was looking at the reasons that people were accused of witchcraft in 16th and 17th century Scotland. And of course, misogyny was one of the underlying reasons for it. But in terms of actually pursuing a career in this, when I started one of my postdocs, I was told I could not have a career looking at equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think it's a feature of my personality that I'm incredibly stubborn. So that made me decide you probably could have a career in doing that. So my own interest has always been looking at the reasons and trying to overcome misogyny, sexism and gender discrimination in all careers. And I started off looking at architecture was my main area of interest because I have a master's in management, in construction management, and I did my PhD in a civil engineering school. So that's what brought me to doing research in this kind of field, is really a commitment to not only understanding the lived experiences, but identifying how we move forward. I'm also active in UCU, which is the trade union for academics and academic related staff in universities. And I do want to acknowledge that a number of academics are on strike today across Scotland and in England as well. And part of that is over gender, disability and race pay gaps. So for me, my academic work and my activist work in the trade union come together, which is really about how do we create more fair, less unequal workplaces so that everybody can thrive. I don't know if you want to know anything else.
No, that's brilliant, Kate. And it'd be good to kind of get some follow up on that once everyone's gone around, because I just think there are so many fascinating parts of that, particularly the RAF story. And I love just learning new things about people. So I feel like every time I speak to you, Kate, I'm learning something new about you, like the civil engineering stuff and the RAF. So that's absolutely brilliant. James?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one to follow, but we all have our own stories to tell, of course. I would say, in short, the reason how I came into this field is entirely by accident, but I will unpick that a little bit as I go along. I started my PhD probably around about 23 years almost to the date, and I didn't pick a subject related to EDI. I'd just previously done a 4-year degree in human resource management at Stirling University, and that didn't involve anything to do with EDI. It was actually around about 2005, maybe a year earlier, and that can't be absolutely sure. And it started with my son, who was about 5 or 6 at the time, who was diagnosed with autism or Asperger's syndrome, as it was called at the time. So that was something that I'd actually really heard of before. It was something that, as naturally as a parent, you look into. And one of the things, because I was interested in employment, working employment, industrial relations, HRM, I did get drawn into looking at a range of publications, mainly books, about employment and autism. And whilst it was quite apparent that the people writing the books were very much well-intentioned, extraordinarily passionate about the key issues involved, but I couldn't help feeling that, you know, the term that I would use now is that they weren't very much based on evidence. And some of them were written in a relatively, what I felt was a kind of naive way. They didn't really understand what I felt to be the true nature of what employment is like, problems with power and control, and there are places potentially for oppression, which can lead to obviously discrimination. Workplace is not the only place for that sort of thing. So that got me interested in thinking about writing a paper on it. I did find a data set, secondary data set, looking at the qualitative experience of people with autistic people in employment, and I went through the long process of trying to get that published in a journal called Personnel Review. Around about the same time, I also did a postgraduate certificate in autism at Sheffield Hallam University to satisfy my own parental and individual kind of curiosity about autism, but also related to something I wanted to explore further in relation to my own career and research. And I think probably the next lucky break was around about 2011. There was a call from the Transport Salaried Staffs Association, or the TSSA, which is a trade union working in that operates in the travel and railway industries. And Kate and I got the gig for that, in a sense. And following on from that, we kind of, that's the rest is history. We've built quite a good reputation from then onwards, really, to do with neurodiversity related to, particularly to do with union organising, but also related to fair work, and also to do with line management as well. So kind of in a way, I find myself quite lucky that I've been able to look at some of the kind of things that have affected me indirectly and directly in real life through my research. So I consider myself quite lucky and privileged to be able to do that.
That's brilliant, James. And just, again, so amazing to kind of hit people's arcs as to how they arrived to this work. And obviously, you know, kind of hearing about your son and hearing about that as, in some respects, an intrinsic motivation is pretty awesome to hear as well. So thank you so much for that. Robert?
There's a level of jeopardy in going third because these are very compelling stories. I guess I would reflect on an early part of my career and then the later part of my career as my reason for being interested in this work. In the very early part of my career, I started out in an engineering faculty and did a PhD in engineering, and was on a temporary contract and got recruited into a permanent contract in a social sciences faculty in a different university. And so I was 4 years into my academic career when I had this reset experience, and it really did throw me. I realised after the fact quite how socially dependent one's research career becomes, because I'd been to the same conferences for 2 or 3 years and got to develop a network and knew who was who, and all of that disappeared when I changed context and started in a different setting. And so that was a very formative experience for me, that sense of discombobulation about having to start again. Then if I look at much later in my career, I've had the luck to end up in positions where I've ended up with leadership teams in a variety of roles, either in my university life or beyond the university. And the experience of fairness and unfairness and explicitness and implicitness in that as to who ends up in which roles and what opportunities are available to people isn't always fair. And for example, as I'm chair of the Chartered Association of Business Schools, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done as an organisation to place the EDI agenda at the heart of what we do. But it's about trying to take things which are typically not mentioned or not noticed and at least begin to make them explicit, and then at least begin to try and do something about them. So that was a sort of lived experience of the fact that you can make a difference in this space by reporting on things like the composition of your leadership team and trying to introduce policies or practices that change that. And then when the EDI Caucus came into view, I began to think that there was something about the way in which I do my research in my sort of core of my academic identity. I do research with leadership teams on strategy and development and organizational change, and have a long history of doing work in that space very close to boardroom type settings. And what you realise, a bit like James's observation, that the naivety with which some theorising of decision-making processes suggests that it's entirely rational and straightforward and fair. And of course it's not really, it's a very different experience. And so the EDI Caucus looked to me like an opportunity to bring some of that research practice of mine about studying from the inside and working with people to try and understand their lived experience of decision making, and to apply that to the EDI agenda in research and innovation careers, to try and understand how we could make the systems in which we all work within and beyond academia more inclusive, in order to get a greater diversity of voices and insights and perspectives into our research and knowledge development, because it makes it better for everyone.
That's great, Robert. And again, just kind of really interesting to hear, you know, in terms of how you work with leadership teams in terms of embedding those kind of areas for consideration. And it's obviously 3 different kind of stories, but it's just really interesting to see how it kind of coalesces and comes together to kind of obviously facilitate this great project. I guess the second question, and happy to go with Kate again, if you're okay with that. Is that okay, Kate? Fantastic. Okay. So in terms of if you would start your academic career again now, would you do anything differently given what you've learned about EDI challenges? Sorry, let me start again. If you were starting your academic career again now, would you do anything differently given what you've learned about EDI challenges you are researching?
So I was cat wrangling, if you wondered what I was doing there for a minute. She's trying desperately to get her feet in. I think that's a really interesting question. I don't ever allow myself to regret things, because I always think that you can learn a lot from what you've done. So I've had an odd academic background. My undergraduate degree was psychology and history, which is an odd combination. I did an MRes in construction management, and then a PhD in civil engineering, a postdoc in ergonomics, and then ended up in a business school. I think things might have been more straightforward if I'd just done psychology and done a PhD in psychology and then got a psychology job. But for me, I've switched over much more to a sociology background, and for me that explains the problems that I'm addressing far better than psychology does. So I'm far more interested in how people are oppressed, for example, in terms of disability, than changing people to fit oppressive workplaces. So maybe there's an argument that I should have started off with sociology and gone through that route. It certainly would have helped me, because some of the key theorists I only know because I've read about them and I have to look up how you pronounce their names, and maybe I would have heard other people pronounce their name. But for me, I've had a lot of industry experience. So a lot of my postdoc, for example, was co-designing with industry. That helped me understand how people speak outside of academia, because I think it can be a real challenge if you've never worked outside of academia. I've worked as a teacher as well, so I've had a really varied background. I think it perhaps would have been nicer if academia didn't rely on people having precarious contracts, because that's the reason I've jumped around from discipline to discipline, was just looking for work. I wish I got involved in the union earlier. I think I could have probably understood more about how you can affect change collectively. But when I look back at my career, I honestly don't think I would do anything different. But that's easy to say because I've reached the stage that I'm at. Perhaps if I was like so many of my colleagues, stuck on precarious contracts, hourly paid, teaching to teaching, I might have a different kind of attitude. There is part of me that wonders if I should go into politics so I can affect change in a different kind of way, but I suspect that might be just as frustrating as trying to get something through 4 rounds of peer review. So I'm afraid the answer to your question is I don't know that I would change anything, because I am where I am. The experiences I've got have led me to this. So even when we think about the EDI Caucus, someone said to me that they'd seen how many unsuccessful applications I'd had in the lead up to this. But each one of those, I think, was a step towards having a successful application. I think if a rejected journal paper is a step towards getting that paper accepted. So I'm afraid it's not in my nature to regret the decisions that I've made. So where I am is pretty much where I wanted to be. I just wish maybe I'd had some teaching on research philosophy and not had to learn it all myself, so that maybe I don't get people's names properly spoken. But sometimes that is the only regret I have. That's not a great answer, but it's the truth.
Oh no, it's a great answer in terms of like I think, you know, the idea of regret, it's an interesting one, and it's to each to their own, but it's a position that I try and hold myself. And I just think that it's brilliant because actually you've used, in some respects, those things that may be deemed as regretful to really propel yourself forward against really a torrent of barriers and challenges. So just brilliant, Kate. And as always, just really inspired by your story, your work, and just actually you as a person. So that's just absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much. James?
Yeah, another tough one to follow. When Kate started, it did make me think of, you know, the song, the saying, "Je ne regrette rien." I very much in that camp. There's absolutely nothing that I regret. I also thought of a New Order song called "There's Nothing That I Regret" as well. Although maybe one or two things I did earlier in my union career, I probably might have done slightly differently, but that's for another conversation. So I don't know, it's a tough one, this, because to be honest, if I was who I am now 20 odd years ago, whenever it was that I first started on my academic path, with my first academic post around 2003, I honestly think, you know, I don't know if I would have gone into academia, because it's definitely changed remarkably in that time. It's changed in the last 5 to 10 years, and it will keep changing. And I think the most important change is that the kind of pressure that's put on you to, which was originally publish, and now it's increasingly to bring in money, typically big research grants, etc. Obviously, EDICa is a big part of that. So it's kind of widening it out a little bit, first of all, though. I mean, I think it's, and I'm not sure how relevant this is, but, you know, whilst in one sense, as we kind of started this conversation, I'm white, male, middle-aged, etc., things like that. But there are other things kind of going around that have set the scene very much for where I am now and what that might mean. I'm very much from a working class background. My dad was a toolmaker. My mum was a care assistant. My brother and sister went to university at the traditional age, 18, 19 years of age, but I flunked school. I worked in engineering like my dad for about 10, 12 years. Ended up at university just by accident in my late 20s, and then 7 years later, bizarrely, I ended up working for university, where I've never been since, at Heriot-Watt University. So it's a really kind of strange way to think of it. And I mean, another way of looking at this as well is that I've also been, in my time, a single parent, a primary carer, and that has been a kind of a major disruptor in terms of my career, let's say. I would say for certain that, you know, in many ways, whilst I am male, white, middle-aged, I've had a kind of very gendered kind of experience of working in academia. I've certainly felt that my career has been held back at least about 5 years in one sense. My son, who I've mentioned already, didn't settle very well in school, lots of exclusions, lots of problems, and that ultimately indirectly impacted on me in terms of the things that I did. So it's very much made me who I am today. Again, like I said before, there's nothing I regret. And every challenge I've kind of risen to, and the journey that I've made is far from traditional, let's say. But then again, the more you speak to, the more you realise how many people working in academia over time have actually had a kind of traditional education path, etc., and things like that. So, in terms of what's made a difference, I don't know. I think it's a funny thing because my career started at a time when academia was probably still quite tricky and brutal to get through, but it's certainly a lot more than it is now. I work with people who are incredibly supportive. I got lots of support from the school, but I think probably one thing I didn't really get was any kind of really mentorship. And that's one thing I probably, on reflection, would like to have had and probably would have made a difference. I think it might have probably mitigated against the kind of many years where I've struggled to kind of just about kind of get things done at times. So, but then again, it's a personal thing as well. You know, there's things around you that make an important difference, but I think sometimes there are also things about yourself as a person. I always consider myself as a person that's always been okay and comfortable asking for help, and also kind of, in a way, haranguing or asking for help, particularly at things like your annual PDR review and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why I did the PG cert in autism. It was a kind of, I need to do things that really going to help me. And so, yeah, I would say lots of things, but again, a very mixed picture. And again, nothing I regret, but and I've certainly had a very colourful career so far, and I expect that to extend into the future as well.
James, thank you so much. And just a really brief follow-up from yourself. Over the 20-year kind of journey, what do you think has been the biggest change in academia? So you spoke about that at the kind of beginning of what you said. What do you think has been the biggest change? So you spoke about kind of how we need to bring in research funding, but what has been the change? Because obviously there'll be a range of ages in the audience, sure. And for some people to contextualize how much it's changed from 20, 15, 10, 5 years ago, it might be hard for people to fathom that. So if you could kind of just literally as brief as possible, just explain that, that'd be really, really useful.
I think it's important to be clear that none of the changes have happened overnight. None of those happened. There was no even big changes that came along, and suddenly the world changed on one particular day or 1 month, etc. It's been a creeping process. But again, this is my lived experience, let's say. But it's just that the weight of expectations and a sense that achievements have to be generally always excellent, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on people, and especially if you're a person who wants to do something that you feel that's important. And I think that's the kind of things that all academics carry around in some way, because we're all so enthusiastic about our subjects and our issues and things that we're interested in. So if you ask us to do more work, then it's inevitable that we're unlikely to shirk that challenge. We will engage with that challenge, and we'll just end up with a lot more work and a lot more pressure, etc., and things like that. So it's really just to do with volume of expectations. And I think in with that, there's obviously a performance metrics or a range of performance metrics that play a part in that as well. I don't recall almost anything like that really being in existence around about 2003 when I first got my first full-time job in academia. And now, we almost, to a certain extent, our careers are managed through these performance metrics. But fortunately, there still is a good degree of scope, I believe, to carve out what you want to do and what you want to achieve within those kind of, tightening frames, let's say.
That's great. Thank you so much, James. Really appreciate that. And Robert, to your good self.
I think I'm even older than my fellow panelists, and it would be 3 decades, not 2 decades, and a lot has changed in the sector. And I think that's what would make me do things differently. If I was doing things in the same time frame, starting my career at the same point chronologically that I started, I don't think I would do anything very differently. But if I was starting my career now, with the benefit of insights from what I've observed as the industry has professionalized and intensified, I think I would do some things differently. And to give you an analogy, I once read a thing about Roger Bannister, who ran the world's first 4-minute mile, that he was a medic who had just come off a shift when he went along to what turned out to be this record-breaking performance. And now there'd be a squad of sports scientists and ice baths and preparation and all that professionalism. And it's a bit like that in academia. So the thing that I liked in what I've heard from James and Kate and from my own reflections is that the thing that's really important is to be driven by your curiosity, and that might lead you to flip from one subject area to another, or from one set of collaborations to another. But I would be really mindful, if I was advising someone who was starting their academic career in the UK system, in the here and now, to be mindful of 3 different things. One is the disciplinary challenge of moving from one area to another. So I said earlier, I moved from engineering to social sciences. And I think that's harder now, because each of our disciplines has got more apparatus around it in terms of methods and the kind of philosophers' names that you can't pronounce. It's quite hard if you're moving from one sector to another to engage with theory and method at the right level of detail to get the outcomes you want. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'd be much, much more mindful now of, if I was starting out, is just the funding landscape. And so our subject, James and Kate and myself, all work in business school settings. And of the 34 units of assessment in the REF 2021 exercise, business management ranks 30th out of 34 in terms of the amount of money per person per year. And it's a tiny fraction of the amount of money that's available if you're in medical or clinical research or in engineering. So your likelihood of having the availability of the kinds of metrics that James referred to that would look your CV look promotable and rewarding is qualitatively impacted by which discipline you occupy, which connects to this idea that there are two kinds of risks around transdisciplinary work now. One is your ability to engage deeply with the ideas and theorizing, and the other is just the funding landscape is different. And then the third thing that I would be more, I take a different attitude to in the here and now versus when I started, is I would be much more open about for a variety of personal reasons, my distaste for being away from home and the consequences of that. So I didn't like remote working or being away at conferences. And throughout my career, I think I've probably self-limited my rate of progress by going to far fewer international conferences than I maybe should have done and than many of my peer group did. And that just limits the rate of growth of your social network because you don't know the people who edit the key journals or who sit on the panels that adjudicate about jobs or funding opportunities. And that has consequences. And so I would be mindful of those three things in a way that I don't think I needed to be when I started out in academia because it was a much more relaxed atmosphere.
That's great. That's so interesting to hear, Robert. And I guess that kind of relaxed atmosphere, I think probably many people don't necessarily recognize that now. I mean, there's very few people I'd come across who would not who wouldn't say it's a relaxed atmosphere. But there also is, I guess, this kind of this privilege that comes from being in this position as well. And it's, I guess, sometimes it's probably remiss of us, or those of us who may not appreciate as much, to kind of appreciate that, because it's a hard line of work, but it's also a very privileged position to be in as well. Especially people who've had careers outside of academia and can kind of maybe draw comparisons. So I think there's some brilliant points there. And I'm just going to reverse the order slightly because I would like Kate to have the last word. So the final question is, and we'll start with James and then we'll go to Robert and then finish with Kate. What single thing do you think could make a difference regarding EDI? So we'll start with James first, then Robert, and then finish with Kate.
Get the pressure off Kate for once, but obviously apply the pressure in a slightly different way. I obviously need permission, rhetorically, of course. There's probably two things that I probably would like to speak about, but both are very much interlinked. I would say primarily, given that one of my main areas of interest in relation to EDI relates to disability. So if I could say one thing that would make a difference in EDI in almost any working environment is adherence to the social model of disability. The social model of disability is a theoretical framework, as probably people know, that relates to the oppression of disabled people. It's been around for about 40 or 50 years. It's based on the kind of principles that EDICa is very much based on, which is about co-design of practices that support people and make workplaces inclusionary. So that's the one thing I would do. I mean, the irony is that the Equality Act is implicitly based on the social model of disability. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem for organisation to incorporate, but for some reason it doesn't. And that kind of leads me on the key thing that it's kind of related to. What I would like to see change most of all, in the broadest sense, is a fundamental reform of how the employment relationship is regulated. I originally come from an employment work industrial relations background. It's then I've moved into EDI and brought the two together in a kind of way. And I think one of the things that does need to change is that there's far too much power drift towards employers. It has been around for about 4 or 5 decades now, and that needs to be reversed in some kind of way. We talk about inequality in the workplace. Fundamentally relates to the nature of the employment relationship, except the reality is, and this doesn't encapsulate everything related to EDI, But if you've got inequality in the employment relationship, it's quite clear that there are parts of the employment relationship or groups associated with the employment relationship and labour markets that are more unequal than others. So that's the one thing that I would like to see changed in one particular way. And if I may just say one thing, and again, it's related to regulation and making sure that there's pressure applied on employers. I would say there are plenty of really good employees out there. It's just there are not enough that go around for all the people who want good employees or want to work for good employees. We need to bring everybody up and congratulate those employees that do really well now, but unfortunately they remain in short supply. Slight divergence towards a political party broadcast in one sense, but I would like to see a Labour government in late 2024, early 2025, principally because they promised to, I know they promised at this stage, to introduce sectoral collective bargaining. And if it was my choice, and if I was speaking to Keir Starmer, I would say, if we introduce sectoral collective bargaining, then equalities must be a statutory part of collective bargaining in those situations. Unions, anybody that represents employees must be able to have some kind of regulatory mechanism to enforce the kind of things that EDICa is actually looking at. Because as we've seen, if employees are broadly left to their own devices, we see that poor practice does generally prevail. Although, like I said before, there's plenty of good practice out there. It's just not enough, that's all.
Thank you, James. Really appreciate that. Robert?
I'm going to take a slightly narrower focus than how UK society might address these issues, and just think of, in our own industry and academia, the kinds of key decisions about who gets to edit a special issue or who gets to secure funding when it's a competitive process. And I would say two things. One, that on one level, of course, it's the quality of the ideas and the thinking that matters. It has to be about excellence. And so you want high quality thinking to be published and high quality research to be done. But secondly, that I think we should find ways in those judgment processes of allowing people the opportunity, at least without mandating it, the opportunity at least to explain how their personal circumstances has configured their submission. So if somebody has had a career which has been marked by some of the things that our panelists have talked about today, caring responsibilities or illness or disability, or that they can reflect on how their case should be heard next to somebody who maybe hasn't had those challenges to overcome. And that would introduce a level of explicitness about a thing which is inherently uncomfortable and usually not spoken about. And that might allow you to say, well, actually, this different voice should succeed in this decision because it's a great idea. And when I look at it in context, I'd make a slightly different rank order of which is the strongest idea or bid or suggestion. And I think we do that in some other parts of our practice around promoting colleagues in university settings. We allow that kind of thing, but we tend not to do it when it comes to publication or grant application processes. And I think introducing that would help us.
That's brilliant, Robert. That's really brilliant. And I so agree with that. And that's a conversation for another day. Kate?
So, yeah, thanks, Jason. And I'll keep my answer fairly brief because I'd like to hear if anybody in the audience has got any questions. But for me, I would really like this work to be recognised as expertise. So I would like disability research to be recognised as expertise. For example, I'd like gender studies research to be recognised as expertise. There is a tendency in this work for a lot of non-evidence-based practices to happen. There's a tendency for people to think, well, that affects me, so therefore I know everything about it. And lived experience is very important, but so is respecting this as an area of academic research, which has robust theory underpinning it. And that's something I would like to see as a strong evidence base and one that recognises that we have expertise and it's not bias, because that's the risk that happens is people will say, well, you're biased, you're a woman, of course you think this, or you're disabled, of course you think this. This is robust empirical research that we do. These are evidence-based interventions that we pilot and carry out. So that would be it for me, is for this work, the work we do to be recognised as expertise, because there is a tendency for people to do this kind of work without the expertise of it. And I can talk about that in more detail if people want examples, but I would cite Athena Swan as an example of where people do the work that don't actually have a robust background in gender studies.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think also, you know, historically the same things apply to work on race as well, and other intersects around class as well, and disability. So thank you so much, Kate, for that, and obviously to James and to Robert. It's been brilliant. I think we've come to the point now where we have about 12 minutes left to be exact. And I think it's a really good opportunity for some audience dialogue. So are there any questions in the question and answer section, please, Lizzie and Siddhartha?
We don't have anybody typing a question in yet, so if you want to sort of give them a minute to digest and see if there's any questions that come in.
You can also raise your hand as well if you'd rather not use the Q&A function.
One hand up.
Yep.
Yeah, so what will the challenges be with the project?
Kate, would you like to take that
So,
question?
yeah. So I think there's a range of challenges. One is we need to focus. We can't solve everything in 2.5 years. So the caucus funding finishes at the end of, well, technically the 2nd of January 2026, but I'm taking that to be before Christmas 2025, is finding a focus. But one of the main challenges, I think, is we will have to have some very difficult and challenging conversations with key stakeholders who are responsible for shaping the culture across the sector. And it may well mean that we have to ask them to do things they don't want to do. And I think that's going to be one of the main challenges, is convincing people to make the kind of changes. I think what we've talked about already so far today is that these changes can't be tweaks. They can't be little things that done. Some of it will have to be whole-scale systemic changes if we really want to create equity across the system. And that, for me, is one of the main challenges that we will face.
That's great. I'm just going to move us on, just mindful of time, I'll move us on to another question, try and see if we can get as many in as possible. And this is open to anyone. How do the panel think the culture of academia will change with a multi-generational academic workforce? Any answers?
I'm happy to have a go at that question.
Thank you,
Jason.
Robert.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity to benefit from that, in that academic careers do tend to keep, lots of academics stay on in their career beyond what might be the national retirement age in legislative terms, and so that spans our community in one direction. And all of us in academia went through a really turbulent experience during the pandemic of entirely remote working, and I think what it did for people of my age demographic or thereabouts was light up to the fact that folks from a much younger age demographic engage with the world socially in completely different ways digitally than we do, or I have historically done. And there's lots of potential in that. So I think getting the full age range of experiences into our academic careers will make us better research communities, because we'll have a more diverse set of views as to what the issues are and what the solutions might be. The challenge is that academia is a career which is beset by a tendency to privilege long service. So the longer you've been around, the more likely you are to be promoted and to have a big H index and the kind of reputation which might earn you funding and social network and so on. And so the challenge is trying to connect younger academics as they enter our community with those opportunities and privileges. But I think there's huge opportunities in genuinely thinking about our academic inquiry as a multi-generational thing. It'd be quite disappointing if it was only folks at the tail end of their chronological working career who were thinking about the future of our planet and the nature of the society that we want to generate, because it's clearly not very inclusive or very sustainable at the moment. And that's not going to be resolved by the folks who got it there. It's going to be resolved by people who've got a vested interest in what comes next.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Robert, for such a thoughtful answer. Abigail Powell's made a comment just to say thank you, great panel. A couple of the panelists spoke about the role of luck in their careers, and I wonder if we downplay our own roles, expertise, experience, and behaviours when we do this. Do the panel have any thoughts on this?
Do you want me to take this one? I'm the the third person not to have spoken. Yeah, a really good question. Can't remember what I said precisely. Maybe I was one of those people who did speak of luck. I think there certainly has been a lot of luck, but there's also probably been a lot of anything but luck in terms of the things that have happened. It's been a partnership very much in terms of my own kind of endeavours and the organisation and the people around me. We all stand on the shoulders of giants to some extent, so to speak. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a funny thing with academics. I'm not sure if you're touching on this, but there is an almost sense of kind of imposter syndrome being an academic. You always feel like that no matter how many papers you publish, no matter what you manage to achieve and whatever that may actually be in your career, you always feel that someone's going to jump out and go, you're a fraud, or you know, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We probably should be more kind of think about the things that we've actually done and how that, you know, what we actually done is a partnership between a range of things, and luck is probably just one way in which we kind of perhaps distance ourselves from our own insecurities to a certain extent.
That's brilliant. Thank you, James. We're doing really well with the succinctness collectively, so this is great. So we'll keep it going. Kate, could you say a little bit more about the challenges with Athena Swan and how or other initiatives like it could be better?
So I'm going to tread carefully here because a lot of people are very invested in Athena Swan, but we just have not seen it make an impact on the gender representation in the sciences. What we have seen is a number of white men who lead Athena Swan panels progress to chair off the back of it. So I won't get into too much detail, but my main problem with it is it doesn't work. And so therefore it has to be looked at as to why is it not working. But I don't have the answers for that. There's probably other people who can respond to that better and perhaps more diplomatically as well.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Kate. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to try and fit in 2 more questions. If you had to choose the most important EDI issue to be solved through the EDI Caucus right now in academia, what would that be in your opinion and why? It'd be interesting to take a 20-second riposte from the 3 of you each.
But I'll go first, Jason. I would repeat the thing that I said earlier, which I think the opportunity to explicitly consider how life circumstances impinge on what it is you're trying to get permission to do, whether that's publish or get money or develop an impact case or supervise a doctoral student. I think that's the thing that I would like to see most.
Brilliant. Thank you. James?
Well, I have to be quite quick for once. I think the most important thing really is to kind of shape and shift senior leaders across the sector, the whole R&I ecosystem. I always default back to my notions of industrial relations, and the employer or the most senior employees are the dominant actors in anything that happens in the workplace. So I think it's important that EDICa shapes how those people think and ultimately what they do.
Thank you so much, James. And finally, Kate?
So if it was me, I would focus solely on disability because it's the only protected characteristic that affects us all. And if we all live long enough, we will all become disabled. So if we can make research and innovation careers accessible for disabled people, that work will make it accessible for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lizzie, I'm not sure if there's any slides come on just to remind us of future work, but in the last instance, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Robert, to James, and in particular to Kate, who has really spearheaded this work, and all 3 have been instrumental, but I would like to single out Kate especially, who I think has been quite remarkable on this project. I think it's important that people have a rough idea what's coming next for EDICa. So there is a flexible fund call, which is in year 1, and it kind of over the life course is to enable the commission of particular types of research and really address stubborn inequalities which persist within the research and innovation ecosystem. For this particular call, EDICa will prioritise research projects that focus on mitigating the effects of COVID-19 and public health measures and inequalities across R&I careers. So for more information about that, again, you can access this on the website. Applications will close on October 31st, 2023. And we are also going to be putting out a COVID survey, which really seeks to kind of identify the experience of everyone who worked in this research area and innovation sector, and really kind of documenting what's happened over the last 3 years and what was the impact on career, research, and other kind of competing factors, including personal life and caring aspects. And the survey closes next week, I believe, next Friday. So that's September 29th. And again, if you go to the website, which is linked at the bottom of the page, or you'll be able to see, and all of you should have access to this, you'll be able to see kind of further information on this area. And all that leaves me to say is the biggest thank you from everyone here at EDICa. Again, a lot of the information that you may want to access is available on social media streams. You have the email address, which is EDI Caucus at hw.ac.uk, and the website link, which is /EDICa Caucus at ac.uk or /, and then you have at EDI Caucus at bsky.social. So you have several kind of handles that you can use to kind of glean more information about EDICa. And just to say again, thank you so much. We recognize how busy everyone is and how fraught this time of year is. So people to have taken the time out of their day to be here, we are immensely grateful. So thank you so much. And with some luck, we'll see you down the road. So thank you and take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.